Her hands shook as she stared at the email. Rejected again. This was the 5th job application this week that had turned her down. The rent was due in 3 days, and her bank account showed a balance that made her stomach twist with anxiety. Just enough for bus fare to her next interview, but not enough for both rent and food. She would have to choose, and the thought of explaining to her landlord why she needed another extension made her chest tighten. Taking a deep breath, she stood up from her small kitchen table, straightened her one good interview outfit, and headed for the door. This wasn't the life she had planned when she graduated with honors from culinary school, but life had a way of throwing unexpected challenges her way. The restaurant she was heading to wasn't fancy, just a small place downtown that needed a line cook, but at this point she would take anything. When she arrived at the Garden Kitchen, she was surprised by how plain it looked from the outside. The sign was simple, with no flashy colors or elaborate design. Just a wooden board with the name painted in green. She pushed open the door and a small bell jingled. The inside was cozy with only about 15 tables, most of them empty at this hour. The decor was minimal but warm. Potted herbs lined the windowsills, and the walls were painted a soft cream color. "Hello? I'm here for the cook interview," she called out, not seeing anyone at first. A man emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel tucked into his waist. He was tall with broad shoulders, wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans under a basic black apron. Nothing about him suggested he was anything more than what he appeared, a regular chef at a modest restaurant. "You must be Abina," he said, extending his hand. "I'm James. Thanks for coming in." She shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for the opportunity." James gestured toward the kitchen. "Let's talk in there. I'm in the middle of prep for tonight." The kitchen was smaller than what she was used to in culinary school, but it was spotlessly clean and well organized. Every tool had its place and the ingredients were neatly labeled. "So," James said, continuing to chop vegetables as they talked, "tell me about yourself. Your resume says you graduated from culinary school but haven't had a long-term position yet." Abina took a deep breath. "Yes, that's right. I finished at the top of my class 2 years ago, but finding a permanent position has been challenging." She didn't mention the series of short-lived jobs that had ended because restaurants closed down, or the ones where male chefs with less experience were promoted over her, or the head chef who had made working conditions so uncomfortable that she had to leave. James nodded, his eyes focused on his chopping. "And why do you want to work here? This isn't exactly a 5-star establishment." "I want to cook," she said simply. "I love food. I love how it brings people together, how it can comfort someone or make their day special. I don't need fancy ingredients or a prestigious kitchen to do that." For the first time, James looked up from his chopping and studied her face. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes seemed to soften slightly. "All right," he said, setting down his knife. "I have a test for all potential hires. Are you ready to cook something for me now?" Abina nodded, trying to hide her surprise at the sudden challenge. "Yes, of course." "Good," James said, gesturing to the refrigerator. "I want you to make me something using only what you find in there. Nothing fancy. Just show me you know how to make simple food taste good." Abina opened the refrigerator and surveyed its contents. It was stocked with basic ingredients: vegetables, some chicken, eggs, a few blocks of cheese and various condiments. Nothing exotic or high-end. This was the kind of challenge she faced at home every day, making something delicious out of whatever was available. She decided on a simple chicken stir-fry with a lemon herb sauce. As she cooked, James watched silently, occasionally making notes on a small pad. She worked efficiently, moving around the unfamiliar kitchen with growing confidence. The rhythmic sound of her knife against the cutting board calmed her nerves, and soon she was completely focused on the task at hand, almost forgetting that this was an interview. When she finished, she plated the dish simply but carefully and presented it to James. He took a bite, his face giving nothing away. Then another. And another. Finally he set down his fork. "Where did you learn that sauce technique?" he asked. "My grandmother," Abina replied. "She always said that the simplest dishes needed the brightest flavors." James nodded slowly. "Your grandmother was right." He took another bite. "The position pays $18 an hour to start. Hours are Tuesday through Saturday, 2 p.m. to close. Can you start tomorrow?" Abina's heart leaped. $18 an hour? "Yes, I can definitely start tomorrow." "Good," James said, standing up. "Be here at 1:30. I'll show you around before we open." As she left the restaurant, Abina felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She could pay her rent now. She could buy groceries. And she would be cooking again, not in some fancy restaurant, but in a place where her food would be eaten by regular people looking for a good meal. It wasn't the dream job she had imagined after culinary school, but it was a start. What she didn't know was that this simple interview was just the beginning of a test, one that would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. And the quiet, unassuming man who had just hired her was watching her more closely than she realized, evaluating much more than just her cooking skills. Abina arrived 20 minutes early for her first day, determined to make a good impression. The restaurant was quiet, with only the sounds of James moving around in the kitchen. She knocked on the back door as instructed, and he opened it immediately as if he'd been waiting for her. "You're early," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "That's good." He handed her a black apron identical to his own and gave her a quick tour of the kitchen, showing her where everything was stored and explaining their system for organizing ingredients and tools. "We're a small operation," James explained. "Just me, you, and 2 servers for now. We don't have a large menu, but everything on it is made from scratch. Quality over quantity." As they talked, Abina noticed things about the kitchen that had escaped her attention during her interview. The knives, while not flashy, were top-of-the-line Japanese steel. The pots and pans were professional grade. And despite James's comment about not being a 5-star establishment, every piece of equipment was the kind you'd find in high-end restaurants. "This setup is amazing," she couldn't help commenting. "I've worked in bigger restaurants with worse equipment." James shrugged. "I believe in investing in the right tools." James shrugged. "I believe in investing in the right tools." The first few hours passed in a blur as James showed her their menu and preparations. It was indeed simple, just 10 main dishes, a few appetizers and 3 desserts, but everything was made with fresh, high-quality ingredients. As dinner service began, Abina settled into her role as line cook, while James worked as head chef. She was surprised by how skilled he was. His movements were efficient and precise, and he had an instinctive sense of timing that allowed him to manage multiple dishes at once without seeming rushed. During a brief lull in orders, she worked up the courage to ask, "Where did you train? Your technique is incredible." James hesitated for a moment before answering. "Here and there. I've worked in a lot of different kitchens." Before she could ask more questions, the next order came in and they were back to work. The night flew by, and before she knew it, they were cleaning up after the last customers had left. "You did well tonight," James said as they wiped down the counters. "You're quick and you pay attention to details." "Thank you," Abina replied, feeling a glow of pride. It had been a long time since anyone had acknowledged her skills. As they finished cleaning, a sleek black car pulled up outside the restaurant. Through the window, Abina saw the driver get out and open the rear door. James glanced at his watch. "You can go home now," he said. "I'll finish up here." Curious, Abina watched as a tall, elegantly dressed woman stepped out of the car. She had the poised, confident air of someone accustomed to luxury. To Abina's surprise, the woman entered the restaurant and headed straight for James, greeting him with a familiarity that suggested they knew each other well. Not wanting to intrude, Abina slipped out the back door, but as she walked to the bus stop, her mind was full of questions. Who was the woman? And why would someone who clearly had money be visiting a modest neighborhood restaurant after closing time? The next day, Abina arrived early again, but James was already there, preparing dough for the day's bread. "Good morning," he said, not looking up from his work. "There's coffee if you want some." "Thanks," she replied, pouring herself a cup. After a moment's hesitation, she asked, "So, how long have you owned this place?" "About 6 months," James answered. It was a hobby that turned into something more. A hobby? Abina couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Most people didn't open restaurants as hobbies. James finally looked up, a slight smile on his face. "Cooking has always been my passion, but I had a different career before this." "What did you do?" she asked, genuinely curious now. "Finance," he said simply, turning back to his dough. "But that's not important now. Today I want you to take charge of the appetizers. Think you can handle it?" She recognized the change of subject for what it was, but didn't press. "Absolutely." As the days passed, Abina settled into her new role. The work was demanding but satisfying, and she enjoyed the creative freedom James gave her. He encouraged her to suggest specials and wasn't afraid to let her take the lead on certain dishes. But the mystery surrounding him only deepened. Twice more during her first week, the same black car arrived after closing, and different well-dressed visitors came in to meet with James. They never stayed long and he never explained who they were. There were other oddities too. Despite claiming the restaurant was just breaking even, James never hesitated to order the best ingredients. When a supplier couldn't deliver the exact type of mushrooms he wanted, he made a single phone call and had them delivered within hours. Something Abina knew was nearly impossible unless you had serious connections. By Friday night, her curiosity had reached its peak. As they closed up, she decided to take a risk. "James," she said, trying to sound casual, "I was wondering if you might want to grab a coffee sometime? Maybe tomorrow before work?" He looked startled, then slightly amused. "Are you asking me out, Abina?" She felt her cheeks warm. "No. I mean, not exactly. I just thought it might be nice to talk outside of work." James studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Sure. There's a cafe around the corner. Meet me there at noon." The next day, Abina spent far too long deciding what to wear. She reminded herself that this wasn't a date. She was just trying to get to know her mysterious boss better. Still, she found herself putting on her favorite jeans and a top that brought out the warmth in her skin. James was already at the cafe when she arrived, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him, in a simple blue sweater and jeans. Without his apron and chef's attire, he looked different, more relaxed but also somehow more imposing. "I ordered you a latte," he said as she sat down. "The server said you come here sometimes." She was surprised he'd noticed her preference. "Thank you." For a few minutes they chatted about work, the new special he wanted to introduce, a technique she had suggested for improving one of the sauces. Then, gathering her courage, Abina decided to be direct. "Can I ask you something, James? And will you give me an honest answer?" He raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Who are you really? I mean, I know you're a chef and a good one, but there's clearly more to the story." James took a sip of his coffee, considering her question. "What makes you think there's more?" "The equipment in the kitchen is top of the line. You have connections that get you impossible ingredients. People in expensive cars come to see you after hours." She paused. "And to be honest, you don't talk like someone who's spent their whole life in kitchens." A slow smile spread across James's face. "You're observant. I like that." He set down his cup. "You're right. I haven't told you everything about myself. But I have my reasons." "Which are?" "I'm looking for something specific," he said cryptically. "And I find that people behave differently around me when they know certain things about me." Abina frowned. "That's not really an answer." "No, it's not," James agreed. "But it's all I can give you right now. I will tell you this though, I hired you because you're talented. You're one of the best cooks I've ever worked with, and I wasn't exaggerating when I said that." The compliment caught her off guard and she felt a warm flutter in her chest. "Thank you. I have a proposition for you," James continued. "Keep working with me for 1 month. After that, if you still want answers, I'll tell you everything. But during that month, I need you to trust me and focus on the cooking. Can you do that?" Abina considered his offer. Every instinct told her there was something unusual about this situation, but she also genuinely enjoyed working at the garden kitchen. And if she was honest with herself, she was intrigued by James and his secrets. 1 month, she agreed. And then full disclosure. "Deal," James said, extending his hand across the table. As she shook it, Abina couldn't help wondering what she was getting herself into. But as they continued their coffee, talking about food and recipes and their shared passion for cooking, she found herself looking forward to discovering the truth about the mysterious chef who had hired her. What she didn't realize was that she was already being tested, and that James was watching her every move, evaluating not just her cooking skills, but her character, her integrity, and her heart. The following weeks flew by in a whirlwind of activity. The garden kitchen was becoming increasingly popular, with more customers each night and even a small write-up in a local food blog that praised their simple yet sophisticated menu. Abina and James fell into a comfortable rhythm working together, their movements in the kitchen becoming almost like a choreographed dance as they anticipated each other's needs without having to speak. On a busy Thursday evening, disaster struck. One of the servers called in sick, and the remaining server, Tasha, was overwhelmed with the full dining room. "I can't keep up," Tasha said, rushing into the kitchen with a harried expression. "There are too many tables." James looked around the kitchen. Everything was under control for the moment, with no immediate orders to fulfill. "I can help," Abina offered immediately. "I worked as a server to pay for culinary school. I can handle the front for a while if you can manage here, James." James studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Go ahead. I'll call you if I need you back here." Tasha handed Abina an apron, and she quickly made her way to the dining area. The restaurant was indeed packed, with nearly every table filled. Taking a deep breath, she approached the first table that needed attention. "Good evening," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Abina. I'll be helping Tasha tonight." Can I tell you about our specials? To her surprise, Abina found she enjoyed being out front. She had always preferred the anonymity of the kitchen, but there was something satisfying about seeing customers' immediate reactions to the food she and James prepared. She moved efficiently between tables, taking orders, delivering food, and making sure everyone had what they needed. At one table sat a middle-aged couple who seemed to be celebrating an anniversary. The woman asked for recommendations, and Abina enthusiastically described James's newest creation, a dish he had actually incorporated from one of her suggestions. "It sounds wonderful," the woman said. "We'll both have that." When Abina brought out their meals, she waited anxiously as they took their first bites. "This is incredible," the man exclaimed. "Compliments to the chef." "Actually," Abina said with a touch of pride, "this dish was my idea. Our head chef and I collaborated on it." The woman looked impressed. "You're not just a server then?" "No, I'm usually in the kitchen. I'm helping out tonight because we're short-staffed." "Well, you've made our anniversary dinner very special," the woman said warmly. As the night progressed, Abina continued to impress customers with her knowledge of the menu and her genuine enthusiasm for the food. She didn't notice James watching her from the kitchen doorway, a thoughtful expression on his face. When the last customer had left and they were cleaning up, James approached her. "You were good out there," he said. "The customers loved you." Abina shrugged. "I was just being myself." "Exactly," James replied. "That's what made it work. You have a natural way with people and you're passionate about the food. That combination is rare." "I still prefer cooking," she admitted. "As you should. You're an excellent chef." He paused, seeming to consider something. "But it got me thinking. Would you be interested in helping me develop new menu items? You have good instincts and I think we could create something special if we work together on it." Abina couldn't hide her excitement. "I'd love that." "Good. We'll start tomorrow." The next day, they arrived early and spent hours experimenting in the kitchen before the restaurant opened. James brought in ingredients Abina had rarely worked with, exotic spices, heirloom vegetables, specialty cuts of meat, and encouraged her to combine them in new ways. "Don't overthink it," he advised as she hesitated over a particularly expensive piece of Wagyu beef. "Just follow your instincts." Under his guidance, Abina found herself creating dishes that were both familiar and innovative, drawing on her Ghanaian heritage while incorporating techniques she had learned in culinary school. James tasted everything she made, offering suggestions but never criticism. "This is amazing," he said after trying a spicy stew she had prepared. "Where did you learn to balance flavors like this?" "My mother," Abina replied, feeling a pang of nostalgia. "She could make a feast out of almost nothing. When times were tough, she'd say, 'Food isn't about what you have, it's about how you transform it.'" James nodded appreciatively. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." As they worked, Abina found herself opening up more about her background. Her childhood in Ghana, moving to America as a teenager, her struggles to be taken seriously in the culinary world. James listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions but sharing little about himself in return. By the end of the day, they had created 3 new dishes for the menu. James insisted on giving Abina full credit, even printing her name beside each item. "People should know who's creating their food," he said when she protested. "I believe in giving credit where it's due." The new dishes were an immediate hit with customers, and Abina felt a surge of pride every time someone complimented her creations. For the first time since graduating from culinary school, she felt truly valued for her skills. One evening, about 3 weeks after Abina had started working at the Garden Kitchen, a food critic from a prominent city magazine came in for dinner. James spotted him immediately. "Don't panic," he told Abina, "but the man at table 7 is Oliver Reed. He's the food critic for City Plate." Abina felt her stomach drop. "The Oliver Reed? The one who made Chef Michaels cry on that cooking show?" "The very same. But we're not going to worry about it. We're just going to cook the way we always do." Despite James's reassurance, Abina felt the pressure mounting as she prepared the critic's appetizer, her signature dish that had been added to the menu the previous week. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the plate, but she took a deep breath and focused on making it perfect. When the server returned to the kitchen, Abina couldn't resist asking, "Did he like it?" "He cleaned his plate," the server reported with a grin. "And he's ordered your main course special too." James gave her an encouraging nod. "See? Nothing to worry about." By the end of the meal, the critic had ordered and finished every one of Abina's dishes on the menu, including her dessert creation. Before leaving, he asked to speak with the chef. "Both of us," James insisted when Abina tried to push him forward. "We're a team." Oliver Reed was a stern-looking man with piercing eyes and a reputation for brutal honesty. He studied them both as they approached his table. "Which of you is responsible for the goat stew with the spiced plantains?" he asked without preamble. "That's one of mine," Abina said, trying to keep her voice steady. The critic nodded. It was exceptional. The balance of heat and sweetness, the tenderness of the meat, it reminded me of a dish I had in Accra years ago, but with a modern twist that made it entirely new. Abina felt a rush of pride. "My grandmother's recipe was my inspiration." "Well, your grandmother taught you well." He turned to James. "And you? What's your role here?" "I'm just the owner," James said modestly. "Abina is the real talent in this kitchen." The critic raised an eyebrow, clearly not believing the self-deprecation. "I've been reviewing restaurants for 20 years, Mr. Clark. I know when a kitchen is being run by someone with exceptional skill. The consistency, the attention to detail, those things don't happen by accident." James inclined his head slightly, accepting the compliment without comment. "Well," the critic continued, "I look forward to writing my review. It's not often I find a new restaurant with such potential." After he left, Abina turned to James, her eyes wide. "Did that just happen? Did Oliver Reed actually like my food?" "Of course he did," James replied as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Your food speaks for itself, Abina. You just needed someone to give you the chance to be heard." As they closed up that night, Abina found herself watching James with new eyes. Despite his attempts to downplay his own role, it was clear that he was far more than just a restaurant owner who happened to cook. The way he had handled the critic, his confidence in the face of such scrutiny, these weren't the actions of an amateur. And yet, he had given her all the credit, had pushed her forward when he could have taken the spotlight for himself. It made no sense. Unless he was testing her for some reason. But why? What could someone like James possibly want from her? As if sensing her thoughts, James looked up from where he was counting the night's receipts. "You did well today," he said quietly. "Not just with the cooking but with how you handled the pressure. Not everyone can keep their composure when someone like Reed is judging their work." "I just focused on the food," Abina replied. "Like you taught me." James smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "The month is almost up," he said. "Soon you'll have your answers. But first there's one more test." "Test?" Abina repeated, her suspicions confirmed. "So all of this has been some kind of evaluation?" "In a way," James admitted. "But not the kind you're thinking of. I've been watching how you work, yes, but more importantly I've been watching how you treat people. The servers, the suppliers, the customers. I've been watching to see if success changes you, if recognition makes you arrogant." "And how did I do?" Abina asked, uncertain whether to be angry or intrigued. "You'll find out soon enough," James promised. "For now, get some rest. Tomorrow is a big day." As Abina left the restaurant that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of discovering something important, that the mysterious James Clark was about to reveal his true identity, and with it, the real purpose behind the garden kitchen. The next morning, Abina woke to the sound of her phone buzzing with a text message. "Don't come to the restaurant today. Meet me at this address at 10 a.m. Wear comfortable clothes. James." The address was in an upscale part of town that Abina rarely visited. Curious and a little apprehensive, she dressed in her most presentable casual outfit, dark jeans and a simple blouse, and took a bus to the unfamiliar neighborhood. When she arrived, she found herself standing in front of a sleek glass building that housed several high-end businesses. The directory in the lobby listed mostly financial firms and law offices, but on the top floor was simply JC Enterprises. The security guard at the desk looked up as she approached. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see James Clark," Abina said, trying to sound confident. "He asked me to meet him here." The guard's demeanor changed immediately. "Ms. Owusu? Mr. Clark is expecting you. Please take the private elevator to the penthouse." He handed her a key card. "You'll need this." Increasingly confused, Abina took the card and made her way to an elevator at the far end of the lobby, marked Private. She inserted the key card and the doors opened silently. The ride to the top floor took less than a minute, but it gave Abina time to wonder what exactly she was walking into. When the doors opened, she found herself in a spacious reception area decorated with modern art and sleek furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city. A young woman sat at a desk by the elevator. "Ms. Owusu," she greeted warmly. "Mr. Clark is waiting for you in the main conference room. Please follow me." She led Abina down a hallway lined with what appeared to be original artwork. Pieces that Abina recognized as the work of celebrated artists. They passed several offices where people in business attire worked at computers or spoke on phones, all of them too busy to do more than glance up as Abina passed. Finally, they reached a set of double doors, which the receptionist opened without knocking. "Ms. Owusu is here, Mr. Clark." Abina stepped into a large conference room dominated by a massive table of polished wood. At the far end, looking out of the window with his back to her, stood a familiar figure, James, but not the James she knew from the restaurant. This James wore an impeccably tailored suit that highlighted his broad shoulders. His hair, usually hidden under a chef's cap, was neatly styled. He turned as she entered, and his face broke into a smile. "Abina, thank you for coming." "I'm not sure I had much choice," she replied, trying to make sense of the situation. "What is this place? And why am I here?" James gestured to a chair. "Please sit down. It's time I explained a few things." Abina took a seat, noting that despite the luxurious surroundings, James seemed completely at ease. More at ease, in fact, than he sometimes appeared in the restaurant. "First, I should introduce myself properly," he began. "My name is James Clark, and I'm the CEO of JC Enterprises. We're a venture capital firm specializing in hospitality investments, restaurants, hotels, resorts." Abina felt her eyes widen. "You're a CEO? But, the restaurant?" "The garden kitchen is one of my personal projects," James explained. "A place where I can indulge my passion for cooking away from the corporate world. But it's also become something more, a testing ground of sorts." "Testing ground for what?" Abina asked, a hint of suspicion creeping into her voice. "For talent," James replied simply. "I've built my career on identifying potential. In businesses, in ideas, and in people. The restaurant allows me to find individuals with real culinary skill who might otherwise be overlooked by the industry." Abina sat back in her chair, trying to process this information. "So when you hired me?" "I saw something special in you," James confirmed. "Not just your cooking skills, which are exceptional, but your passion, your resilience, your creativity. I wanted to see what you could do in an environment where you were judged solely on your abilities, not on your background or connections. And all this time you've been, what? Evaluating me?" Abina couldn't decide whether to be flattered or offended. "In a way," James admitted. "But not for the reasons you might think. I wasn't looking to exploit your talents, Abina. I was looking to invest in them." He pressed a button on the table and a screen descended from the ceiling. With another click, it displayed a series of architectural renderings. A beautiful restaurant with an open kitchen, lush garden spaces, and elegant dining areas. "This is Roots," James said, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "A concept for a new restaurant that celebrates the African diaspora through food, traditional recipes reimagined with modern techniques and local ingredients. It's something I've been developing for a while, but I needed the right chef to bring it to life." Abina's breath caught as she looked at the images. It was like someone had reached into her dreams and pulled out exactly the kind of restaurant she had always imagined running one day. "You want me to work there?" she asked, hardly daring to hope. James shook his head. "I want you to run it. As executive chef and partner." Abina stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Partner? But I don't have that kind of money. I can barely make rent most months." "The financial investment would be mine," James clarified. "Your contribution would be your talent, your vision, and your hard work. In return, you'd receive a significant ownership stake in the restaurant, a competitive salary, and complete creative control over the menu." For a moment, Abina was speechless. It was too good to be true, the opportunity she had been working toward her entire career, handed to her by a man she had believed was just a fellow chef. "Why me?" she finally asked. "There must be dozens of chefs with more experience, better connections." "Experience can be gained," James said dismissively. "Connections can be made. But what you have, the intuitive understanding of flavor, the respect for ingredients, the ability to tell a story through food, that can't be taught." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I've eaten at the finest restaurants in the world, Abina. I've had meals prepared by chefs with Michelin stars and international reputations. But your cooking speaks to me in a way there's never has. It has heart. It has soul." Abina felt a lump forming in her throat. After years of being overlooked and underestimated, to hear someone, especially someone like James, speak about her food with such reverence was overwhelming. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say you'll consider it," James urged. "Take some time to think about it." Review the business plan, look over the contract, consult with a lawyer if you want to. He slid a folder across the table to her. Everything you need to know is in here. The location, the budget, the concept development so far. I've left plenty of room for your input on all of it. Abina opened the folder and skimmed the first page, which outlined a generous compensation package that made her current salary look like pocket change. But it was more than the money, it was the opportunity to create something meaningful, to showcase the culinary traditions she had grown up with, to tell her story through food. This is incredible, she said finally. But I have to ask, why all the secrecy? Why not just approach me directly with this offer? James sighed, leaning back in his chair. I've learned the hard way that money changes how people act. In the past, when I've approached chefs as James Clark the investor, I've seen them put on a performance, cooking what they think I want to taste, saying what they think I want to hear. I never know if I'm seeing their true talents or just a show designed to get my backing. He gestured around the opulent conference room. All of this, the company, the success, the wealth, it creates barriers between people. At the Garden Kitchen, I'm just James the chef. People respond to me honestly. They show me who they really are. Abina nodded slowly, beginning to understand. And that's what you wanted to see with me? The real me? Exactly, James confirmed. I needed to know not just that you could cook, but how you handle pressure, how you treat people when you think no one important is watching, whether success makes you arrogant or grateful. In other words, I needed to know if you were someone I could trust with not just my money, but my reputation. And? Abina asked, holding her breath. Did I pass your test? James smiled, the same warm smile she had come to know in the kitchen, but now it carried the weight of his true identity behind it. With flying colors. You're exactly who I hoped you would be, Abina. Talented, yes, but also kind, humble, and genuinely passionate about food. You never treated the servers or suppliers as beneath you, even when you started receiving recognition for your dishes. You shared credit freely and accepted criticism gracefully. And most importantly, you never compromised on quality or integrity, even when it would have been easier to do so. Abina felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. It was one thing to believe in herself, but to have someone like James, someone who had clearly seen the best in the business, validate her talent and her character meant more than she could express. Thank you, she said simply, for seeing something in me that others missed. The pleasure has been mine, James replied. Now, would you like to see the proposed location for Roots? It's not far from here. Abina nodded eagerly and James led her back to the elevator. As they descended to the lobby, she found herself studying him with new eyes. Now that she knew the truth, she could see hints of his real identity in his posture, his confidence, the way others deferred to him. Outside, instead of the black car she had seen at the restaurant, a sleek red sports car waited at the curb. James opened the passenger door for her. This is yours. Abina asked, trying not to sound as impressed as she felt. James shrugged. One of them. I rarely drive it, but I thought today called for something special. The drive took them to a recently developed area of the city, where modern buildings stood alongside carefully restored historic structures. James pulled up in front of an elegant brick building with large windows and a small courtyard. This is it, he said, a note of pride in his voice. Built in 1920 as a bank, renovated last year. The bones are perfect for a restaurant, high ceilings, good flow, enough space for both intimate dining and larger gatherings. He led her inside and Abina gasped. The space was even more beautiful than it had appeared in the renderings. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating original hardwood floors and exposed brick walls. The former bank vault had been converted into what could be a stunning private dining room. The kitchen would be there, James said, pointing to an area at the back. Open to the dining room so guests can see the action. We'd build it to your specifications, of course. Abina walked through the space, her mind racing with possibilities. She could already envision where everything would go, how the flow would work, what it would feel like to cook here. I can see it, she said softly. It's perfect. James watched her, a pleased expression on his face. I thought you'd like it. As they continued to explore the building, James explained more details about the business proposal. The restaurant would feature a rotating menu that highlighted different regions of Africa and the diaspora, with a focus on sustainable, locally sourced ingredients. There would be a teaching component as well. Cooking classes, apprenticeships for young chefs from underrepresented backgrounds. The goal, James said, is not just to create an exceptional restaurant, but to change the conversation about African cuisine in the culinary world. It was as if he had reached into Abina's heart and extracted her deepest professional aspirations. This was exactly the kind of impact she had always dreamed of making. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "You clearly don't need the money, and with your connections, you could partner with any established chef in the city." James was quiet for a moment, leaning against one of the brick walls. "My mother was a cook," he said finally. "Not a chef, she never had that opportunity, but she fed people with love and skill in a small diner in the town where I grew up. She taught me everything I know about food, about hospitality, about working hard and taking pride in what you create." He looked around the space, his expression thoughtful. "When she died 10 years ago, I promised myself that I would use whatever success I achieved to create opportunities for talented people who might otherwise be overlooked, the way she was. This project, Roots, is part of fulfilling that promise." Abina felt a connection to James she hadn't expected. The shared experience of having been shaped by strong women who expressed their love through food. "Your mother would be proud," she said softly. James smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I hope so." After leaving the building, they went to lunch at a small cafe nearby. As they ate, they discussed ideas for the menu, for staffing, for the overall vision of Roots. Abina was surprised by how much her opinion seemed to matter to James, how carefully he listened to her suggestions and built upon her ideas. "I still can't believe this is happening," she admitted as they finished their meal. "A month ago, I was struggling to pay rent, worried I'd never get a real chance to prove myself. And now you're about to become one of the most talked about chefs in the city," James completed her thought. "But remember, this isn't charity, Abina. I'm offering you this opportunity because I believe you'll make it a success, for both of us." Abina straightened in her chair, her expression serious. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," James replied, his confidence in her evident. "Take the weekend to review the proposal. If you have any questions or concerns, we can discuss them on Monday." As he drove her home, Abina tried to process everything that had happened. In the span of a single day, her life had changed completely. She had gone from being a line cook in a small restaurant to potentially becoming the executive chef and part owner of an innovative new concept backed by a successful businessman. When they reached her apartment building, a modest structure in a working-class neighborhood, James insisted on walking her to her door. "Thank you," Abina said as they stood outside her apartment. "Not just for the opportunity but for believing in me when I was starting to lose belief in myself." James looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The talent was always there, Abina. All I did was recognize it." For a moment they stood in silence and Abina felt something shift between them. A tension, a possibility, a connection that went beyond their professional relationship. Then James stepped back. "I should go. Take your time with the proposal. There's no rush." As she watched him walk away, Abina knew that her life would never be the same again. And she couldn't help but wonder if there might be more developing between them than just a business partnership. The weekend passed in a blur as Abina pored over every detail of James's proposal. The business plan was meticulous, the financials solid, the concept exactly what she would have created if given free rein. She kept expecting to find a catch, some hidden clause that would diminish the opportunity, but there was none. It was by any measure a dream come true. And yet she hesitated. The practical part of her brain reminded her that she barely knew James Clark. The real James Clark, not the humble chef she had worked alongside for a month. He was wealthy, powerful, connected. A man who moved in circles she had never even approached. What if he changed his mind once the novelty wore off? What if she couldn't meet his expectations? By Monday morning, her apartment was littered with notes, her mind racing with both excitement and anxiety. She was due to meet James at his office at noon to give him her answer, but she still wasn't entirely sure what that answer would be. Her phone rang, startling her out of her thoughts. It was Tasha, the server from the garden kitchen. "Abina? Are you okay? James said you wouldn't be in today, but he didn't explain why. We've been worried." "I'm fine," Abina assured her, touched by the concern. "It's a long story, but I might be making some changes. Actually, can I ask you something? What do you think of James, as a person, I mean? Do you trust him?" There was a pause on the other end. "That's a strange question," Tasha said finally. "But yes, I trust him completely. He's the best boss I've ever had, fair, respectful, generous." "Why do you ask?" "It's part of that long story," Abina replied. "But thanks. That helps." After hanging up, Abina made a decision. She would accept James's offer, but with one condition. She wanted to start small, perhaps with a pop-up restaurant first, to test the concept before committing to the full-scale vision of Roots. With her mind made up, she dressed carefully in the most professional outfit she owned, a simple black dress she had bought for job interviews, and headed to James's office. This time the building and the private elevator didn't intimidate her. She knew what to expect, and she was determined to approach this meeting as an equal partner, not as an employee being offered a gift. The receptionist greeted her warmly and led her not to the conference room, but to James's private office, a spacious room with the same stunning views as the rest of the penthouse. James rose from behind his desk as she entered, his smile genuinely pleased. "Abina, I hope you had a chance to review everything." "I did," she replied, taking the seat he offered. "It's an incredible opportunity, James. More than I ever expected." "But," he prompted, clearly sensing her hesitation. "But it's a lot very fast," Abina admitted. "I believe in my abilities, but I've never run a restaurant before, let alone one with this kind of investment behind it. I'd like to propose a modification to your plan." James leaned back in his chair, looking intrigued rather than offended. "I'm listening. What if we start smaller? A series of pop-up dinners, perhaps, to test the concept and build a following before we commit to the permanent location? It would give me a chance to refine the menu, build a team gradually, and prove that this can work, both to you and to myself." She held her breath, waiting for his reaction. To her relief, James nodded thoughtfully. "That's actually a very prudent approach," he said. "It reduces the initial risk, allows us to gather feedback, and creates anticipation for the permanent restaurant. I'm impressed, Abina. Most chefs in your position would be eager to dive straight into the deep end." "I want this to succeed," she said simply. "Not just for a few months or even a year, but for the long term. That means building solid foundations." James's expression was one of approval and something else. Respect, perhaps, or even admiration. "I agree. Let's develop a plan for a series of pop-up events over the next 6 months, leading up to the grand opening of Roots. We can use the garden kitchen for some of them, and other venues for others, to reach different audiences." Relief washed over Abina. "So we have a deal?" "We have a deal," James confirmed, extending his hand across the desk. "Partner." As they shook hands, Abina felt a tingle of electricity at his touch, and their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Once again she sensed that undercurrent between them, attraction, connection, possibility. James cleared his throat and released her hand. "We should celebrate. Dinner tonight? There's a new restaurant I've been wanting to try, the chef trained under one of my friends in Paris." "I'd like that," Abina replied, trying to determine if this was a business dinner or something more personal. As if reading her thoughts, James added, "Not as boss and employee or even as business partners. Just as friends getting to know each other better." "Friends?" Abina repeated, finding she was a little disappointed by the designation. "That sounds nice." James smiled. "I'll pick you up at 7. That evening, Abina spent more time than usual preparing for their dinner. She chose her most flattering dress, a deep blue that complemented her skin tone, and took extra care with her makeup and hair. She tried to tell herself that she was just making an effort because they were going to a nice restaurant, but she knew there was more to it than that. At precisely 7 o'clock, the buzzer rang. When she opened the door, she found James standing there in a tailored suit that fit him perfectly, holding a small gift bag. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes appreciative but respectful. "Thank you," Abina replied, suddenly feeling shy. "You clean up pretty well yourself." James handed her the bag. "A small token to mark our new partnership." Inside, Abina found a cookbook, a rare first edition of a classic work on West African cuisine that she had mentioned admiring once in passing at the restaurant. The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. "How did you remember this?" she asked, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "I remember everything you say," James replied simply. The restaurant he had chosen was indeed exceptional, an intimate space with just 12 tables, where each course was presented by the chef himself with a brief story about its origins and inspiration. As they dined, Abina found herself relaxing, the conversation flowing naturally between them. They talked about food, of course, but also about books they had read, places they had traveled, music they enjoyed. James told her more about his childhood, growing up in a small town with a single mother who worked 2 jobs to support him, getting a scholarship to a prestigious university where he felt perpetually out of place among his wealthier classmates. "It wasn't until I started my first company that I really felt like I belonged anywhere," he admitted. "When I succeeded on my own terms, not trying to fit into someone else's mold." "I understand that feeling," Abina said. "In culinary school, I was always the odd one out, too traditional for the modernists, too innovative for the traditionalists. It took me a long time to embrace my own voice." James nodded. That's what makes your cooking so special, Abina. It's authentic. It tells your story. By the time they finished dessert, a delicate confection of chocolate and spice that reminded Abina of something she might create, she felt as if she was seeing the real James for the first time. Not the humble chef or the powerful CEO, but the man behind both personas, thoughtful, passionate, surprisingly vulnerable at times. When he drove her home, there was a comfortable silence between them, a sense of connection that hadn't been there before. At her door they paused and Abina found herself hoping he might kiss her. Instead, James took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," he said softly, "and for taking a chance on this partnership. I have a feeling we're going to create something extraordinary together." "I think so too," Abina replied, trying to hide her disappointment that the evening was ending on such a professional note. But as she watched him walk away, she reminded herself that their relationship was primarily a business one, and it was probably best to keep it that way. Mixing romance with work rarely ended well, especially when there was such a power imbalance between them. Still, as she prepared for bed that night, she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to be with someone like James. Someone who saw her fully and valued not just her talent, but her perspective, her ideas, her very self. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as they prepared for the first pop-up dinner. James rented a beautiful space in an art gallery for the event, and they worked together to create a menu that would showcase Abina's vision for Roots. Working with James in this new context was both exhilarating and challenging. He respected her authority in the kitchen, but he had strong opinions of his own, and they occasionally clashed over details. Yet these disagreements were always productive, pushing both of them to refine their ideas and find better solutions. And beneath their professional collaboration, Abina sensed a growing attraction, in the way James's hand lingered when passing her a utensil, in the late nights spent talking after the work was done, in the pride that shone in his eyes when she mastered a new technique or perfected a dish. But neither of them acted on these feelings, maintaining a careful distance that became increasingly difficult to sustain. The night of the first pop-up dinner arrived and Abina was a bundle of nerves. James had invited some of the city's most influential food critics and restaurateurs, people whose opinions could make or break a new chef's reputation. "What if they hate it?" she whispered to James as they prepared to serve the first course. "What if I'm not ready for this level of scrutiny?" James took her hands, steadying them with his own. "They won't hate it," he said firmly. "Your food is brilliant, Abina. But even if some of them don't appreciate it, that doesn't diminish its value or your talent. Remember that." His confidence in her was contagious, and Abina felt her anxiety begin to subside. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's do this." The dinner was a triumph. Each course was met with appreciative murmurs and empty plates returned to the kitchen. By the time they served the final dish, a reinvention of a traditional Ghanaian dessert that had been Abina's grandmother's specialty, the atmosphere in the room was jubilant. As the guests began to leave, offering effusive compliments on their way out, one of the most respected critics in the city approached them. "Ms. Owusu," she said, extending her hand, "that was one of the most exciting meals I've had in years. You've managed to honor traditional flavors while creating something entirely new. I'm eagerly anticipating your permanent restaurant." "Thank you," Abina replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. "That means a lot coming from you." When the last guest had departed and they were alone in the kitchen, James pulled out a bottle of champagne he had been keeping on ice. "To Roots," he said, handing Abina a glass. "And to the extraordinary chef who will make it a success." They clinked glasses and Abina felt a rush of happiness mixed with something deeper. A sense that she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do with exactly the right person by her side. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said softly. "Yes, you could have," James contradicted her gently. "You just would have taken a different path to get here. Your talent was always going to find its way to the light, Abina." She looked up at him, touched by his words and the sincerity behind them. "Maybe. But I'm glad this is the path I'm on." Their eyes met, and in that moment, the careful distance they had maintained seemed to evaporate. James set down his glass and moved closer to her. "Abina," he said, his voice low. "I've been trying to keep things professional between us, but I think we both know there's something else happening here." Her heart raced as she nodded. "Yes, there is. I don't want to complicate our partnership," James continued, "but I can't pretend I don't feel this connection between us." "I feel it too," Abina admitted. James reached out, his fingers gently brushing her cheek. "So where do we go from here?" Abina took a deep breath, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything between them. I think, she said carefully, that we explore this connection, slowly, see where it leads, but with the understanding that our professional relationship comes first. Agreed, James said, his relief evident. We take it one step at a time. He leaned down, and Abina closed her eyes as their lips met in a kiss that felt like both an ending and a beginning, the end of uncertainty, the beginning of possibility. As they broke apart, both a little breathless, Abina couldn't help but laugh softly. What's so funny? James asked, smiling down at her. Just thinking about how far we've come from that first day in the garden kitchen, she replied. When I thought you were just a chef with a small restaurant, and you thought I was just another cook looking for a job. We were both hiding parts of ourselves, James acknowledged. Me behind a facade of simplicity, you behind a wall of caution. I'm glad we found our way past those barriers. Me too, Abina said, leaning her head against his chest. As they stood there in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of their successful dinner, Abina felt a sense of peace settle over her. The future held challenges, of course. Building a business was never easy, and navigating a personal relationship alongside a professional one would require care and communication. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly seen and valued for exactly who she was. And that, she realized, was the most precious gift James had given her. Not the opportunity or the partnership or even his affection, but the simple act of recognition. In the end, the test hadn't been about proving herself to him. It had been about finding the courage to believe in herself as fully as he believed in her. In the months that followed the first pop-up dinner, Abina and James established a rhythm that balanced their growing personal relationship with their professional partnership. By day they were focused and productive, working with architects on the design for Roots, interviewing potential staff members, and hosting a series of increasingly successful pop-up events that generated buzz throughout the city's food scene. By night, they were getting to know each other on a deeper level, sharing meals at hidden gem restaurants James had discovered over the years, taking walks through the city's parks, or simply talking for hours in the quiet of James's penthouse apartment, a stunning space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a kitchen that made Abina's heart race with envy the first time she saw it. You could host a cooking show in here, she had commented, running her hands over the marble countertops and professional-grade appliances. I prefer cooking for an audience of one, James had replied, pulling her close for a kiss. Their relationship was progressing steadily, each of them careful not to rush into something they might regret. James, Abina discovered, was more cautious than she had expected. A man who had been burned by past relationships where his wealth and status had been the primary attraction. It's different with you, he told her one evening as they sat on his balcony, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and pink. You knew me as just James the chef first, and you treated me exactly the same after you found out who I really was. Do you know how rare that is? Abina squeezed his hand, understanding the vulnerability behind his words. You're still just James to me, she assured him. The only difference is now I know why you never seem concerned when we order the most expensive ingredients for a recipe. He laughed, the tension breaking. I do have a budget, you know. It's just flexible. As the opening day for Roots approached, the pressure intensified. There were last-minute construction delays, issues with suppliers, staff members who needed additional training. Abina found herself working 18-hour days, often falling into bed too exhausted to do more than send James a quick goodnight text. One particularly stressful day, after discovering that their custom-made dining tables would be delayed by at least 2 weeks, Abina felt her composure begin to crack. We can't open without tables, she said to James, pacing the half-finished dining room. And if we push back the opening, we lose the momentum from the pop-ups. The critics will forget about us, the reservations we've already taken will have to be rescheduled. It's a disaster. James watched her for a moment, then pulled out his phone. Give me an hour, he said, stepping outside to make a call. True to his word, exactly 1 hour later, he returned with a solution. A renowned furniture maker who owed him a favor would create replacement tables in time for their opening, and they would be even more beautiful than the ones they had originally ordered. How do you do that? Abina asked, amazed and a little intimidated by the ease with which he had solved a problem that had seemed insurmountable to her. James shrugged. Resources and relationships. After 15 years in business, you accumulate both. The point is, this isn't a disaster. It's just a bump in the road. His calm confidence steadied her, as it had so many times before. But later that night, alone in her apartment, Abina found herself wondering if she was truly an equal partner in their venture, or if she was still, in some fundamental way, dependent on James's wealth and connections to make Roots a success. The thought nagged at her, creating a small seed of doubt that grew over the following days. She found herself hesitating to ask James for help with problems, trying to solve everything herself to prove that she wasn't relying on him too heavily. James noticed the change in her behavior. "What's going on?" he asked finally, after she had spent an entire day trying to resolve an issue with their liquor license without involving him. "You've been distant. Did I do something wrong?" Abina sighed, knowing she couldn't hide her feelings from him. "It's not you exactly. It's this whole situation. Sometimes I wonder if I'm really bringing equal value to this partnership, or if I'm just the talent you're bankrolling." James looked stunned. "Is that really how you see yourself? As some kind of investment?" "Sometimes," Abina admitted. "When you solve problems with a single phone call that would take me weeks to figure out. When you casually mention friends who own Michelin-starred restaurants or supply the White House with wine. It's hard not to feel unequal." James was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "I understand," he said finally. "And I'm sorry if I've made you feel that way. But Abina, you need to understand something. The connections, the resources, the ability to make things happen quickly. Those are tools, not talents. You can learn to use those tools. I can teach you if you want." "But your talent?" he continued, his voice growing passionate. "The way you understand food, the way you create flavors that tell a story, the way you connect with people through what you cook? That can't be taught. That can't be bought. And that's why this partnership works, because we each bring something essential to it that the other doesn't have." His words resonated with Abina, easing some of her concern. "I hadn't thought of it that way." "Well, start thinking of it that way," James said firmly. "Because it's the truth. And while we're being honest with each other, there's something else I need to tell you." Abina felt a flicker of anxiety. "What is it?" "I'm in love with you," James said simply. "Not with your cooking, not with the business we're building together, but with you, Abina Owusu, the woman who challenges me, surprises me, and makes me happier than I've been in years." Abina stared at him, her heart pounding. It was the first time either of them had used that word, love, and hearing it from James's lips sent a wave of emotion through her so powerful that for a moment she couldn't speak. "You don't have to say it back," James added quickly, mistaking her silence for hesitation. "I just wanted you to know how I feel." "I love you too," Abina said, finding her voice at last. "I think I have since that first coffee we had, when you were still pretending to be just a chef and I was trying to figure out your secrets." James's face broke into a smile of such genuine joy that Abina felt tears spring to her eyes. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with an intensity that left her breathless. "No more pretending," he murmured against her lips. "No more test. Just us as we really are, building something together." "I like the sound of that," Abina replied, letting herself relax into his embrace. The declaration of love marked a turning point in their relationship. Abina found herself opening up more, sharing fears and dreams she had kept guarded, while James revealed a softer, more vulnerable side that few people ever got to see. As opening day for Roots drew closer, they were both working at a feverish pace, but they made sure to carve out time for each other. Even if it was just a quick dinner after a long day or a moment of quiet connection before falling asleep. The night before the grand opening, after the final rehearsal with the full staff, James suggested they stay behind after everyone else had left. "Just you and me," he said, "cooking one meal in our kitchen before it officially becomes Roots tomorrow." Abina loved the idea. They had been so busy managing others that they had barely cooked together in weeks. They decided to make a simple meal, the same chicken stir-fry with lemon herb sauce that Abina had prepared during her interview at the Garden Kitchen, what felt like a lifetime ago. As they worked side by side in the gleaming new kitchen that would soon be the heart of their restaurant, Abina felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, creating food that told her story, alongside a man who valued both her talent and her heart. When the dish was ready, they sat at one of the new tables in the empty dining room, a single candle between them and glasses of wine James had selected from Ruth's carefully curated cellar. "To tomorrow," James said, raising his glass. "And to all the tomorrows after that." "To us," Abina replied, clinking her glass against his. "And to the journey that brought us here." As they ate, they talked about their hopes for Roots. Not just that it would be successful in the conventional sense, but that it would become a place where people felt welcomed, where the food created connections, where stories were shared and remembered. "You know," James said thoughtfully, "when I first came up with the concept for this restaurant, it was just a business idea, a way to fill a gap I saw in the market. But you've transformed it into something much more meaningful. You've given it a soul." Abina felt touched by his words. And you've given me the platform to share my vision with the world. I couldn't have done this without you, James. We did it together, he corrected gently. As equals. After dinner, as they were cleaning up, James suddenly stopped and turned to Abina. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. An opening gift of sorts. He handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a pendant in the shape of a key. It's beautiful, Abina said, lifting it from the box. But what does the key represent? It's the key to my home, James explained. I want you to move in with me, Abina. I know it's a big step, but the past few months have shown me that what we have is special, and I don't want to waste any more time living apart. Abina felt a rush of emotion. She had been thinking similar thoughts, especially on the nights when exhaustion meant they slept separately, each in their own apartment. Yes, she said without hesitation. I'd love to live with you. James's face lit up with happiness as he helped her put on the necklace, his fingers warm against her skin. Perfect timing too, he said. After tomorrow's opening, we can arrange to move your things. As they locked up the restaurant and stepped out into the night, Abina couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. From a struggling cook facing rejection after rejection to the co-owner and executive chef of what promised to be one of the city's most exciting new restaurants. From a woman who had nearly given up on finding someone who truly understood her to someone deeply in love with a man who saw and valued all of her. And it had all begun with a test. A billionaire pretending to be a poor chef, watching to see if she had what it took to be his partner in business and perhaps someday in life. As if reading her thoughts, James squeezed her hand. I knew from that first interview that you were special, he said softly. But I never imagined how completely you would change my life. We changed each other's lives, Abina replied, leaning into his side as they walked to his car. And tomorrow we start the next chapter together. The key pendant rested against her heart, a promise of the future they would build, not just the restaurant that would open its doors the next day, but the home they would create together, the life they would share, the love that had begun in the most unexpected of places. A humble kitchen where a billionaire had pretended to be a poor chef, and a talented woman had proven she was worthy of not just success but love. The day of Root's grand opening dawned bright and clear, as if even the weather was celebrating with them. Abina woke early, her mind already racing with last-minute details and preparations. James was still asleep beside her, his face peaceful in the soft morning light. She allowed herself a moment to simply watch him, appreciating how far they had come together. Just 6 months ago, she had been desperate for any cooking job, standing in front of the garden kitchen with shaking hands and dwindling hope. Now she was about to open her own restaurant with a man who loved her not just for her talent, but for who she was. As if sensing her gaze, James opened his eyes. Today's the day, he murmured, reaching for her hand. How are you feeling? Nervous, excited, terrified, grateful, Abina replied honestly. All at once. James smiled, squeezing her fingers. That sounds about right. But you're ready for this, Abina. We both are. They shared a quiet breakfast together, their last moment of peace before the whirlwind of opening day began. By 9 o'clock, they were at the restaurant, where staff were already arriving for final preparations. The space looked even more beautiful than Abina had imagined when they first saw the architectural renderings. The dining room blended modern elegance with warm, earthy elements that reflected the restaurant's focus on African cuisine. Custom artwork from artists across the diaspora adorned the walls, and the open kitchen allowed diners to watch their meals being prepared. As the day progressed, Abina found herself caught up in 1,000 small tasks, checking the quality of the produced deliveries, making sure the kitchen staff understood each dish, reviewing the wine pairings with their sommelier. James handled the front-of-house preparations, working with the hosting staff and making sure every detail of the dining experience was perfect. By late afternoon, with opening just hours away, Abina felt a moment of panic. What if no one came? What if they came but didn't understand or appreciate her food? What if the critics who had praised her pop-ups found fault with the permanent restaurant? What if she had reached too high too fast? James found her in the walk-in refrigerator, organizing herbs with more intensity than the task required. He could read the anxiety on her face immediately. Talk to me, he said gently, closing the door behind him to give them privacy. What's going through your mind right now? Abina took a deep breath, the cool air of the refrigerator helping to calm her racing thoughts. I'm scared, she admitted. This is everything I've ever wanted, and now that it's actually happening, I'm terrified I'll somehow mess it up. James stepped closer, his hands warm on her shoulders despite the chilly air around them. You know what I think? I think that fear means you care deeply about this. It means you understand what's at stake. That's not weakness, Abina. It's wisdom. Maybe, she said, not entirely convinced. But it doesn't make the fear any less real. No, it doesn't, James agreed. So let's break it down. What's the worst that could happen tonight? Abina thought for a moment. We could get terrible reviews. No one could make reservations after tonight. We could fail completely. And if that happened, which it won't, but if it did, what then? James pressed. We'd reassess. Make changes. Try again, Abina said slowly, realizing as she spoke that failure wouldn't be the end. Exactly, James said with a nod. But you know what? That's not going to happen. Because I've tasted your food. I've seen you lead a kitchen. I've watched people's faces when they experience your cooking for the first time. This restaurant is going to succeed, Abina. But even if it didn't, we would still have each other. And we would still have your talent and my stubborn determination. A smile tugged at the corners of Abina's mouth. You are pretty stubborn. Incurably so, James agreed, his own smile warming his eyes. Now, let's go open the best restaurant this city has seen in years. When they emerged from the refrigerator, the staff was gathered in the kitchen, waiting for their final instructions before opening. Abina looked at the faces around her. People who had believed in her vision enough to join the team, from experienced chefs she had handpicked to servers who had impressed her with their knowledge and enthusiasm. Thank you all for being here, she began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. What we're creating together isn't just a restaurant. It's a place where stories are told through food, where traditions are honored and reinvented, where every guest leaves feeling not just satisfied, but connected to something larger than themselves. Tonight is just the beginning of that journey, and I'm grateful to be taking it with each of you. The staff applauded, their energy and excitement palpable. James caught Abina's eye across the room, his expression full of pride. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doors of Roots opened to welcome their first guests. The initial hour was reserved for friends, family, and a select group of influencers and media representatives. A soft opening before the general reservations began at 7. Abina's focus narrowed to the kitchen, where she directed her team with calm authority, making sure each dish that left her hands was perfect. She had decided to work the line herself on opening night, wanting to be directly involved in the cooking rather than just supervising. From her station, she could see into the dining room, where James moved smoothly between tables, greeting guests and ensuring their experience was flawless. He was in his element, his natural charm and attentiveness making everyone feel special. The first round of feedback began to filter back to the kitchen. Exclamations of delight, empty plates returned for washing, servers reporting that guests were raving about the food. With each positive comment, Abina felt her confidence grow. By 8 o'clock, the restaurant was in full swing, every table occupied, the atmosphere vibrant with conversation and laughter. One particularly notable food critic had just been seated. Oliver Reed, the same stern-faced man who had visited the garden kitchen months earlier. He's at table 9, James murmured to Abina during a brief moment between orders. He specifically requested your tasting menu with the wine pairings. Abina nodded, determined to impress him even more than she had the first time. For his table, she personally inspected each dish before it left the kitchen, adding small flourishes and ensuring every element was precisely placed. As the night progressed, Abina found herself fully immersed in the rhythm of the kitchen, her earlier fears replaced by the familiar focus and joy of cooking at her highest level. Her team worked seamlessly around her, everyone rising to the occasion of their opening night. Just after 10, during a slight lull in orders, James appeared in the kitchen doorway, gesturing for Abina to join him. The critic wants to speak with you, he said quietly when she approached. And he's smiling, which I've never seen before. In the dining room, Oliver Reed was finishing the last of his dessert, Abina's modern take on her grandmother's coconut pudding. He stood as she approached, extending his hand. Chef Owusu, he said, his voice carrying enough to draw the attention of nearby tables. I've been reviewing restaurants for over 20 years, and I can say without reservation that my meal tonight was one of the finest dining experiences I've had in this city. Abina felt a rush of pride and gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Reed. That means a great deal coming from you. What you've created here, he continued, is something truly special. You've managed to make food that is simultaneously innovative and comforting, technically brilliant and deeply soulful. It's clear that each dish comes from a place of personal connection and cultural reverence. That's exactly what I hope to achieve, Abina said, genuinely moved by his understanding of her vision. Well, you've succeeded magnificently, Reed replied. You'll be reading my full review next week, but I wanted to tell you in person that Roots has just set a new standard for this city's dining scene. After Reed left, several other tables requested to meet Abina, each offering their own compliments and congratulations. By the time the last guest departed shortly after midnight, she was exhausted but elated. The staff gathered for a celebratory toast once the restaurant was empty, everyone riding the high of a successful opening night. James raised his glass to Abina. To our extraordinary executive chef, he said, his voice filled with pride. Who proved tonight what I've known since the first meal she cooked for me, that she is one of the most talented chefs of her generation. Cheers erupted, and Abina felt tears pricking at her eyes. Thank you all, she said when the noise died down. This wouldn't have been possible without each of you. And especially you, James. For believing in me from the beginning. After the staff departed and they had finished their final checks of the restaurant, James and Abina stood together in the quiet dining room, still buzzing with energy despite their exhaustion. How does it feel? James asked, his arm around her waist. To have your own restaurant? To have everyone raving about your food? Abina considered the question, searching for the right words. It feels like coming home, she said finally. Like I've found where I'm supposed to be. James nodded, understanding perfectly. That's how I felt when I found you, he said softly. Like after searching for so long, I'd finally come home. They shared a kiss in the empty restaurant, surrounded by the space they had created together and filled with the promise of all that was still to come. 6 months after opening night, Roots was thriving beyond even their most optimistic projections. Oliver Reed's glowing review had been just the first of many, with local and national publications praising Abina's innovative cuisine and the restaurant's celebration of African diaspora food traditions. Reservations were booked solid 3 months in advance, and they had recently been nominated for a prestigious James Beard Award for Best New Restaurant. Success, however, brought its own challenges. Abina was working longer hours than ever, often arriving at the restaurant before dawn to meet with specialty suppliers and not leaving until long after the last customers had departed. James, meanwhile, was juggling his responsibilities at Roots with his other business interests, which had been somewhat neglected during the intense period of opening the restaurant. One morning in early spring, Abina woke to find James's side of the bed empty, a note on his pillow explaining that he had an early meeting with investors and would see her at the restaurant later. It was the third time that week they had missed having breakfast together, a ritual they had both cherished in the early days of their relationship. At Roots, the day was particularly hectic. One of their line cooks had called in sick, and they were preparing for a private event that evening alongside their regular dinner service. Abina was in the midst of demonstrating a complex technique to her sous chef when James arrived, looking harried. Can we talk? He asked, glancing at the clock. I only have about 20 minutes before I need to be on a conference call. Abina felt a flicker of annoyance. I'm a little busy right now, James. Can it wait until later? It's about the investor dinner tomorrow, he replied. I need to confirm the menu and guest list. Sighing, Abina wiped her hands and followed him to their small office at the back of the restaurant. As they discussed the details, she couldn't help noticing how their conversation had taken on a business-like tone. Gone was the easy warmth and playfulness that had characterized their early working relationship. Is everything okay? She asked when they had finished the necessary planning. You seem distant lately. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of stress. I'm fine. Just juggling a lot right now. We both are, Abina pointed out. But we used to make time for each other despite the chaos. I know, James acknowledged. And we will again. It's just a busy period. Once the James Beard announcement is behind us and this new investment deal is settled, things will calm down. Abina wanted to believe him, but a small voice in her head wondered if this was just the beginning of a larger pattern. Would there always be another deal, another event, another reason to put their relationship on the back burner? That evening, after the private event had ended successfully and the last customers had left the main dining room, Abina found herself sitting alone at the bar, nursing a glass of wine. The restaurant was quiet now, just the soft sounds of the cleaning crew in the background. James had left earlier to attend a business dinner with potential investors for one of his other ventures. Mind if I join you? A voice asked, breaking into her thoughts. She looked up to see Daniel, their head sommelier, standing nearby with his own glass of wine. Daniel had been one of their first hires, a talented wine expert with an engaging personality that customers loved. He and Abina had developed a good professional relationship, collaborating closely on wine pairings for her seasonal menus. Please, she said, gesturing to the stool beside her. I could use the company. Tough day? Daniel asked, settling in. Tough month, Abina replied with a tired smile. But today was actually pretty good. The private event went well, and a food writer from that national magazine was here. She seemed to enjoy everything. She did more than enjoy it, Daniel confirmed. She told me it was the best meal she's had all year. You're going to get another rave review. Abina felt a glow of pride. No matter how exhausted she was, hearing that her food had made an impact never lost its thrill. So why the solo drinking session? Daniel asked gently. Abina swirled the wine in her glass, considering how much to share. Just thinking about balance, how to manage success without losing sight of what matters. Daniel nodded understandingly. The restaurant business is notorious for consuming people's lives. It's hard to maintain relationships when you're working 80-hour weeks. Especially when the relationship is also a business partnership, Abina added, thinking of James. Ah, Daniel said, comprehension dawning. That does complicate things. They talked for a while longer, Daniel sharing stories from his own career path and offering a sympathetic ear as Abina cautiously expressed some of her concerns about her relationship with James. It was refreshing to speak with someone who understood the demands of restaurant life but wasn't directly involved in her personal situation. By the time they finished their wine, Abina was feeling somewhat better, less alone in her struggles at least. Daniel offered to share a cab since they lived in the same general direction, and she accepted gratefully, too tired to navigate public transportation. When she finally arrived home, she found James waiting up for her, looking troubled. I've been calling you, he said as she walked through the door. I was worried. Abina checked her phone and realized she had missed several calls while talking with Daniel. I'm sorry. I stayed late at the restaurant having a glass of wine with Daniel. I needed to decompress after today. A shadow crossed James's face. With Daniel? Yes, Abina replied, puzzled by his tone. We were just talking about work, life, finding balance. It was nice to have someone to talk to. You could have talked to me, James said, a hint of hurt in his voice. Abina felt a flash of irritation. Could I? You've been so busy lately, I wasn't sure you had time for a real conversation. The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted their sharpness. But they had hit upon a truth that had been building between them for weeks. James was quiet for a long moment. You're right, he said finally. I haven't been as present as I should be. But that doesn't mean I don't want to hear what's on your mind. And I should have answered your calls, Abina acknowledged, her anger fading. I think we're both struggling to adjust to all the changes in our lives. They moved to the couch, the tension between them easing slightly as they sat close together. I miss you, James admitted, taking her hand. Even though we see each other every day, I miss the way things were between us. I miss you too, Abina said softly. And I worry sometimes that the restaurant is taking over everything. That we're becoming business partners first and a couple second. James nodded, his expression thoughtful. I've been thinking about that too. Maybe we need to set some boundaries, designated times when we don't talk about work, regular date nights even when we're busy. I'd like that, Abina agreed. And maybe we should also think about how to give each other space when we need it, without jealousy or misunderstanding. James's fingers tightened slightly around hers. Like your conversation with Daniel tonight? It was just a friendly talk, Abina said, meeting his eyes directly. But yes, sometimes I need to connect with people who aren't involved in our business. Who can just be friends without all the complications. I understand, James said after a moment. And you're right. We both need our own friends and interests outside of what we share. They talked late into the night, more openly than they had in weeks, acknowledging the challenges they faced and making plans to address them. By the time they finally went to bed, some of the distance between them had closed, though Abina sensed there were still unresolved feelings on both sides. The next few weeks brought mixed results in their efforts to balance their relationship and the restaurant. They managed to establish a weekly date night, when they would leave roots in the capable hands of their staff and focus solely on each other. Those evenings reminded Abina of the early days of their relationship. The easy conversation, the laughter, the simple joy of being together without agenda or obligation. But the pressures of running a successful restaurant continued to create strain. James was increasingly involved in a new business venture, which meant he was often absent during crucial moments at Roots. Abina found herself making more decisions alone, sometimes resenting that the day-to-day responsibilities fell primarily to her while James maintained control of the larger financial aspects. Matters came to a head on the night of the James Beard Awards announcement. They had closed the restaurant for the evening, gathering with their staff to watch the live stream of the ceremony. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation as they waited to hear whether Roots would win Best New Restaurant. When the envelope was opened and another restaurant's name was called, there was a collective moment of disappointment before the staff rallied, raising glasses to celebrate how far they had come regardless of the outcome. Everyone agreed that being a finalist in their first year of operation was an achievement to be proud of. Everyone except James, who grew noticeably quiet as the evening progressed. Later, after the staff had gone and they were closing up alone, he finally voiced what was bothering him. "We should have won," he said, his tone uncharacteristically bitter. "Our concept is more innovative, your food is more technically accomplished, our reviews have been better." "Maybe," Abina replied, trying to stay positive. "But Meadowlark is an amazing restaurant too. And they've been working toward this for years." "We worked hard too," James countered. "I've invested everything in making Roots the best restaurant possible." Something about his wording struck Abina wrong. "You've invested? I thought this was our restaurant, James. Something we built together." James sighed, running a hand over his face. "Of course it is. You know that's not what I meant." "Do I?" Abina asked, the strain of the past months surfacing in her voice. "Because lately it feels like you see Roots as just another business investment. Something you check in on between more important meetings." "That's not fair," James said, his own frustration evident. "I've put millions of dollars into this restaurant. I've leveraged my reputation and my connections to make it a success. And I've put my entire life into it." Abina shot back. "My creativity, my heritage, my 70-hour work weeks. This isn't just a line on your investment portfolio for me, James. It's my dream." They stared at each other across the empty restaurant, the distance between them suddenly feeling insurmountable. "I think I should stay at my old apartment tonight," Abina said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "We both need some space to cool down." James nodded stiffly, hurt and anger still visible in his eyes. "Maybe that's for the best." As Abina gathered her things and headed for the door, a part of her hoped he would stop her, would say something to bridge the gap that had opened between them. But he remained silent and she left alone, the night air cool against her tear-streaked face. She hadn't stayed at her old apartment in months, but she had kept the lease, partly as a storage space and partly as a subconscious insurance policy against the very situation she now found herself in. The space felt small and empty after the luxury of James's penthouse, but there was something comforting about its familiarity. This was where she had lived when she was fighting for her dreams alone, before James had entered her life. As she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, Abina confronted the question that had been hovering at the edges of her mind for weeks. Had their relationship moved too quickly, built as it was on the dual foundations of professional partnership and personal attraction? Was it possible to truly separate those aspects of their lives, or would the business always bleed into the personal, creating resentments and power imbalances? She didn't have answers, only a deep ache in her chest and the unsettling feeling that something precious was slipping through her fingers. 3 days passed without Abina returning to James's penthouse. They saw each other at the restaurant, of course, maintaining a professional facade for the sake of their staff and customers. But the easy intimacy they had shared was replaced by careful politeness, both of them navigating around the unresolved conflict between them. Abina threw herself into her work with renewed intensity, developing new dishes and refining existing ones until they were flawless. In the kitchen she was in control, her authority unquestioned, her expertise valued. It was a relief after the emotional complexity of her relationship with James. James, for his part, seemed to be giving her the space she had requested, though she occasionally caught him watching her with an expression of longing that matched the ache in her own heart. They were both too stubborn, too hurt, to be the first to reach out. On the fourth night, Abina was just finishing her shift when Daniel approached her in the kitchen. "A few of us are going for drinks at that new place around the corner," he said. "You look like you could use a break from these four walls. Want to join?" Abina hesitated, glancing toward the office where James was working. It was their usual pattern for her to check in with him before leaving, to discuss how service had gone and make plans for the next day. But the thought of another stilted, professional conversation made her heart sink. "You know what? I'd love to," she said decisively. "Let me just grab my coat." The bar was busy but not crowded, with a relaxed atmosphere that felt worlds away from the controlled chaos of Roots. Abina found herself seated between Daniel and their pastry chef, Zoe, with several other staff members clustered around the table. It was the first time she had socialized with her team outside of work, and she was surprised by how different they all seemed in this context. More relaxed, more themselves. To Chef Abina, Daniel said, raising his glass. For creating the best kitchen I've ever worked in. The others echoed the toast, and Abina felt a rush of gratitude for these people who had helped bring her vision to life. I should be toasting all of you, she replied. Roots wouldn't be what it is without each person at this table. The evening progressed pleasantly, with conversation flowing from work anecdotes to personal stories. Abina found herself laughing more than she had in weeks, the tension she had been carrying in her shoulders finally beginning to ease. She was in the middle of a story about her culinary school days when she looked up and saw James standing near the entrance of the bar, his eyes fixed on their table. Their gazes locked for a moment before he turned and walked out without a word. Abina faltered mid-sentence, her good mood evaporating. Excuse me, she said to the group. I'll be right back. She hurried outside, looking in both directions before spotting James halfway down the block, walking rapidly away. James, she called, quickening her pace to catch up with him. James, wait. He stopped but didn't turn around, his shoulders rigid with tension. When she reached him, she could see the hurt and anger on his face. So this is why you haven't been answering my texts? He asked, his voice low and tightly controlled. You're too busy having drinks with the staff? With Daniel? Abina felt a flare of indignation. It was a spontaneous thing after work. And I'm allowed to have a social life, James? It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't it? James challenged. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're building a life that doesn't include me. That's not fair, Abina protested. We've barely spoken in days, and when we do, it's all about work. What did you expect me to do? Sit alone in my apartment every night, waiting for you to decide our relationship is worth fighting for? James ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. I've been trying to give you space, Abina. You're the one who walked away. You're the one who decided to stay at your old apartment instead of talking things through. Because you weren't listening. Abina exclaimed, emotion breaking through her composure. You were so wrapped up in your own disappointment about the award that you couldn't see how your words hurt me. How they made me feel like just another investment to you. That's not how I see you, James said, his voice softening slightly. You know that's not how I see you. Do I? Abina asked, echoing the question from their argument days earlier. Because sometimes I wonder if you ever really saw me at all, or if I was just a talented chef you could add to your collection of successful ventures. The words hung between them, harsh in the quiet night air. James's expression shifted from anger to pain, and then to something harder, more closed off. If that's what you think of me, he said finally, then maybe you're right. Maybe we do need space. He turned to walk away, and this time Abina didn't try to stop him. She stood on the sidewalk, tears blurring her vision, the gulf between them feeling wider than ever. When she returned to the bar, her change in mood was obvious. Daniel immediately slid over to make room for her, concern in his eyes. Everything okay? He asked quietly as the others continued their conversation. Not really, Abina admitted, keeping her voice low. James and I are going through something. Daniel nodded sympathetically. I thought things seemed tense between you lately. Do you want to talk about it? Abina considered the offer. Part of her wanted to maintain professional boundaries, to keep her personal struggles private. But another part desperately needed someone to confide in, someone who might understand the specific pressures she was facing. Not here, she said finally. But maybe another time. That another time came 2 nights later, when Daniel offered to help Abina close up after a particularly busy service. James had been absent all day, attending meetings related to his other business interests, and Abina had shouldered the full weight of running Roots alone. As they finished the closing tasks, Daniel suggested they share a nightcap in the empty restaurant, just one glass of wine to unwind after the long day. Too exhausted to go home to her empty apartment, Abina agreed. They sat at the bar, sipping glasses of a rich red wine that Daniel had selected, the restaurant quiet around them. Gradually, Abina found herself opening up about the conflict with James, how their professional and personal relationships had become dangerously intertwined, how success had changed the dynamic between them, how she sometimes felt caught between gratitude for his support and resentment at the power imbalance it created. It's like I can't separate the chef from the woman anymore, she confessed. And I'm not sure James can either. Daniel listened attentively, offering insights from his own experiences in the industry without presuming to know exactly what she was going through. His presence was comforting, uncomplicated in a way her relationship with James had never been. For what it's worth, he said as they finished their wine, I think you're an incredible chef and an amazing person, Abina. With or without James's backing, you would have found your way to success. It might have taken longer, but talent like yours doesn't stay hidden. His words warmed her, easing some of the doubt that had crept into her confidence during her conflict with James. "Thank you," she said softly. "I needed to hear that." They stood to leave, Daniel helping her into her coat with a gentlemanly gesture that made her smile. As they moved toward the door, he hesitated, then leaned forward and kissed her cheek, a brief, friendly gesture that nonetheless lingered a beat longer than was strictly necessary. "Good night, Abina," he said, stepping back. "Things will work out one way or another." She nodded, suddenly flustered by the moment of closeness. "Good night, Daniel. And thank you for listening." As she made her way home, Abina found herself analyzing the interaction, wondering if there had been something more behind Daniel's friendly support. And if there was, how did she feel about it? The question troubled her, not because she was attracted to Daniel, though he was certainly attractive, but because its very existence suggested that her commitment to James was more fragile than she had believed. If a simple moment of connection with someone else could make her question things, what did that say about the foundation of her relationship? The next morning, Abina arrived at Roots earlier than usual, determined to sort through her conflicting emotions and refocus on what mattered: the restaurant she had helped build and the relationship she had thought would last. To her surprise, James was already there, sitting alone in the dining room with a cup of coffee and a pensive expression. He looked up as she entered, and she could see that he was as tired as she felt, with shadows under his eyes and tension in his jaw. "We need to talk," he said simply. Abina nodded, removing her coat and taking the seat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of unresolved feelings hanging between them. "I saw you with Daniel last night," James said finally, his voice careful and controlled. "Through the window as I was walking by." Abina felt a jolt of anxiety, wondering exactly what he had seen and how he had interpreted it. "We were just talking," she said quickly. "Having a glass of wine after closing." "I know," James replied, surprising her. "I could see that it was innocent. But watching you with him, how comfortable you seemed, how openly you were talking, it made me realize something." "What?" Abina asked, her heart racing. "That I've been an idiot," James said, a hint of self-deprecation in his voice. "That I've been so caught up in making sure Roots succeeds as a business that I forgot why I wanted to create it in the first place. For you. For us. As a place where your talent could shine, yes, but also as something we built together, as equals." Abina felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she held them back, needing to hear more before she let herself believe that reconciliation was possible. "I never meant to make you feel like an investment," James continued. "But I understand now why my words hurt you. The truth is, Abina, you're the most important person in my life. Not because of what you bring to Roots, but because of who you are. Because I love you." The sincerity in his voice reached a part of Abina that had been walled off during their conflict, breaking through her defenses. But she needed more than just words. "I love you too, James," she said carefully. "But love isn't enough if we can't find a way to balance our professional and personal relationships. If every business disagreement turns into a personal hurt, we'll tear each other apart." James nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "You're right. Which is why I have a proposal." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a document, sliding it across the table to her. Abina glanced down at it, confused. "What is this?" "A new partnership agreement," James explained. "One that gives you full creative control over Roots and a majority stake in the business. I would retain some financial interest, but all operational decisions would be yours." Abina stared at him in shock. "You're giving me control of Roots? Why would you do that?" "Because it's your vision," James said simply. "Because you're the heart and soul of this place. And because I need to prove to you, and to myself, that our relationship matters more to me than any business arrangement." "But you've invested so much," Abina protested. "Your money, your time, your connections. And it was worth every penny and every minute to see what you've created here," James replied. "But I have other businesses, other investments. What I don't have, what I can't bear to lose, is you." Tears spilled down Abina's cheeks as the full import of his gesture hit her. This wasn't just a business concession, it was a profound act of trust and love, a deliberate rebalancing of power between them. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll come home," James said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Say you'll give us another chance to get this right." Abina looked down at their joined hands, then back at his face, the face of the man who had once pretended to be a poor chef to test her abilities, who had seen her potential when others had overlooked it, who was now willing to step back from a successful venture for the sake of their relationship. "Yes," she said finally, her voice firm despite her tears. "Yes to both." Relief and joy washed over James's face as he stood and circled the table, pulling her into his arms. Their kiss was tender, a promise of healing and new understanding. When they finally broke apart, Abina looked up at him with a small smile. "But I have a counter-proposal." "I'm listening," James said, his hands still warm on her waist. "I don't want full control of Roots," Abina said. "I want us to be true partners in every sense. Equal decision-making power, equal financial stake, equal responsibility. Not just here but in everything. Our home, our future, all of it." James considered her words, his expression thoughtful. "True partners," he repeated. "I think I'd like that." And in that moment, standing in the quiet restaurant they had built together, Abina knew they had passed the most important test of all. Not one of talent or ambition or business acumen, but of love and commitment and willingness to grow together as equals. 1 year after the opening of Roots, Abina stood in the kitchen of their newest venture, a cooking school dedicated to preserving and celebrating culinary traditions from across the African diaspora. The school, named Heritage, occupied the building next door to Roots, creating a small culinary complex that had become one of the city's most vibrant food destinations. The past year had brought numerous changes, both professional and personal. After their reconciliation, Abina and James had restructured their business relationship as true equals, each bringing their unique strengths to their shared enterprises. Abina handled the creative and culinary aspects, while James focused on business strategy and expansion. But all major decisions were made together, with honest communication and mutual respect. Their personal relationship had deepened as well, growing stronger through the challenges they had overcome. They had learned to maintain boundaries between work and home, setting aside specific times when business discussions were off-limits. Their date nights had become sacred, a weekly reminder of what mattered most in their busy lives. Now, as Abina prepared for the first class at Heritage, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The cooking school had been her idea, a way to share her knowledge with aspiring chefs and home cooks while preserving traditional techniques and recipes that might otherwise be lost. James had embraced the concept immediately, working alongside her to transform it from dream to reality. "Everything ready?" James asked, entering the teaching kitchen where Abina was arranging ingredients for the inaugural class. "Just about," she replied, smiling as he crossed the room to kiss her cheek. "The students should be arriving in about half an hour." James surveyed the space with approval. The teaching kitchen was state-of-the-art but welcoming, designed to accommodate both professional training and community classes. Like Roots, it reflected Abina's vision while bearing touches of James's practical business sense. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "A little pre-class gift." Abina raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What's the occasion? Do I need an occasion to give something to the woman I love?" James countered with a smile. "But if you insist, let's call it a celebration of everything we've built together this past year." Curious, Abina opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with a small chef's knife charm dangling from it. The knife was inlaid with tiny diamonds that caught the light, making it sparkle. "It's beautiful," she said, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Look at the inscription," James urged. Abina turned the tiny knife over in her fingers, reading the words engraved on the blade, "From test to forever." Her eyes filled with tears as she recognized the reference to their beginning, the test that had brought them together when James had pretended to be a poor chef in order to find a partner worthy of his investment. What had started as a business evaluation had led to the deepest relationship of either of their lives. "I love it," she said, extending her wrist for James to fasten the bracelet. "And I love you." "I love you too," James replied, his fingers warm against her skin as he secured the clasp. "More than I ever thought possible." They shared a quiet moment together, both reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. Then, with practiced efficiency, they returned to their preparations for the class. The students began arriving shortly after, a diverse group of 12, ranging from professional cooks looking to expand their skills to enthusiasts eager to learn from one of the city's most celebrated chefs. Abina welcomed them warmly, feeling none of the nervousness she had expected. This was her element, sharing her passion for food with others who appreciated its power to connect and nourish. James stayed for the introduction before slipping away to handle some business at Roots. They had learned that while they were stronger together, they didn't need to be physically present in the same space all the time. Their trust in each other's abilities had grown alongside their personal trust, allowing them to pursue individual projects within their shared vision. The class was a success, with students responding enthusiastically to Abina's teaching style and the dishes she had selected, traditional recipes with subtle contemporary touches. By the end of the 3-hour session, the kitchen was filled with laughter and the rich aromas of West African spices. As the students departed, many of them already asking about signing up for the next series of classes, Abina felt a deep satisfaction in sharing her culinary heritage with a new generation. She was cleaning up, still buzzing with energy from the successful class, when James returned. He watched her from the doorway for a moment, his expression one of quiet pride and love. "How was it?" he asked, stepping into the kitchen. "Amazing," Abina replied, her face glowing with excitement. They were so engaged, so eager to learn. One woman told me she'd been trying to recreate her grandmother's jollof rice for years without success, and today she finally got it right. James smiled, recognizing the joy that teaching brought her, a different kind of fulfillment from the acclaim she received at Roots, but equally important to her sense of purpose. "I have a surprise for you," he said. "A celebration dinner. Just the two of us." "What about service at Roots?" Abina asked. Though they had built a strong team capable of running the restaurant in their absence, they rarely both stepped away during dinner hours. "Daniel and the team have it covered," James assured her. "I checked in just now and everything's running smoothly. Tonight is just for us." Abina agreed happily, curious about what James had planned. They had become experts at carving out meaningful time together despite their hectic schedules, but spontaneous dates like this were still special. To her surprise, James led her not to his car but up a flight of stairs to the small rooftop garden they had created above the two buildings. It was a private space, used primarily to grow herbs and specialty ingredients for the restaurant, but tonight it had been transformed. Twinkling lights were strung overhead, and in the center was a table set for two, with candles and flowers creating an intimate atmosphere. "James," Abina breathed, taking in the romantic setting. "This is beautiful. I thought we should celebrate under the stars," he said, pulling out her chair. "Where we can see everything we've built together." From their vantage point, they could indeed see both roots and heritage below them, as well as the vibrant city beyond. It was a clear night, the first truly warm evening of spring, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of the herbs growing around them. A server, one of their staff from Roots, appeared with champagne in the first course, then discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone. The meal that followed was a careful recreation of dishes from their relationship journey. The chicken stir-fry Abina had made during her interview at the garden kitchen, specialties from their pop-up dinners, and finally, a dessert from Roots' opening night menu. "You remember all of these?" Abina said, touched by the thoughtfulness behind the menu. "Of course," James replied. "Food has been our language from the beginning. These dishes tell our story." As they finished their dessert, the reinvention of Abina's grandmother's coconut pudding that had so impressed the critic on opening night, James reached across the table for her hand. "Abina," he began, his voice carrying a note of seriousness that made her heart beat faster. "This past year has been the most challenging and the most rewarding of my life. Building businesses together has been exciting, but building a life with you has been the real privilege." He stood and, to Abina's astonishment, moved to kneel beside her chair. "I know we've talked about the future in general terms," he continued, still holding her hand in his. "But tonight I want to be specific. I want to ask you to be my wife. To continue this journey together, not just as business partners or as a couple, but as a family." From his pocket, he produced a ring, a stunning but understated design featuring a center diamond surrounded by smaller stones in a pattern that reminded Abina of the constellation visible above them. "James," she whispered, emotion making it difficult to speak. "Are you sure? With everything we have at stake professionally?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he interrupted gently. "What we've built can be protected with contracts and agreements. But what we have together, that's worth more than any business. That's what I want to commit to for the rest of our lives." Tears of joy spilled down Abina's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "Yes, I'll marry you." James slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her, a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. "You know," Abina said, looking down at the ring now sparkling on her hand, "when I walked into the garden kitchen that day, desperate for any job that would pay the rent, I never imagined it would lead to this. And when I decided to play the role of a humble chef looking for a talented cook, I never dreamed I'd find the love of my life," James replied. Sometimes the best journeys are the ones we don't plan. They stayed on the rooftop late into the night, talking about their dreams for the future, not just for their businesses but for their life together. Perhaps children someday, a home that was truly theirs, travel to explore culinary traditions around the world. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced the challenges of the past year. Together as equals, with love and respect at the foundation of everything they built. As they finally prepared to leave, the city quiet beneath them and the stars bright overhead, Abina paused to look at the two buildings that represented their shared vision. From roots to heritage, they had created something meaningful, a celebration of cultural legacy, of passion for food, of the power of partnership. I used to think success meant running a renowned restaurant, earning accolades, being recognized for my talent, she said thoughtfully. And those things are wonderful. But this, what we have together, this is the real success. James wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they gazed out at their creation. The best test I ever devised, he murmured. And the only one where I was tested as much as you were. Abina turned in his arms to face him, her eyes reflecting the twinkling lights above. We both passed, she said with a smile, reaching up to touch his face. And now we have forever to enjoy the rewards. Their kiss, under the stars and above the world they had built together, sealed a promise that had begun in a humble kitchen, where a billionaire had pretended to be a poor chef and a talented woman had proven herself worthy of not just success, but true partnership in every sense of the word. In the end, they had tested each other, not just for skill or talent or business acumen, but for the capacity to love, to grow, to become more together than they could ever be apart. And in that most important test, they had both emerged triumphant.